My name is Angela McArdle. I hate the government, and so much so that it seems I've developed sort of a one-dimensional personality. I'm going to try to break out of that a little bit and talk about more than my absolute hatred of the government. Let's do a little bit of a historical review over the past year and then talk about the path forward. What happened the last year or so, I think, is a better example than anything else in my lifetime, and maybe anyone else in this room's lifetime, of what happens, like what kind of horror is unleashed upon the world when society abandons the ideas and the values of individualism and freedom. People lost their jobs, family businesses, life savings, children's college funds. Suicide and alcoholism rates skyrocketed, domestic violence rates soared, and our civil liberties all but disappeared. Here we are sort of recovering, right? But we're not back to normal. People basically gave into tyranny for the sake of the greater good, to save society, to save you, me, whether you like it or not, whether it helped or not, whether it hurt or not. And while thousands of people across the country protested government's actions, millions more were complacent. Lots of people knew in their hearts that lockdowns were wrong, but they didn't speak out. They just complied. And it was a really uncomfortable realization. Many people in this country do not want or value personal liberty, and they don't even want you to have your personal liberty either. Why have so many people given into the narrative that we need to be locked down, masked up, and injected with an experimental vaccination in order to be safe and normal? What has happened to us? We live in a country that fought a revolution basically over a 3% tax. And here we are now, right? It's sort of like we're in exile. We've drifted so far from the founding principles of this country and from what we all immediately associate with the word freedom, that it's like we've undergone this painful separation from it, like we're in exile from our liberties. And now we're sort of floundering in the wilderness. We're aimless, frustrated, confused. A lot of people are confused. They don't even understand what freedom is, lashing out at each other. We're all trying to get somewhere, maybe, with no idea how to do it. So why did this happen, and how? We can look back at history and see most of the major errors for those of us who know history, because not everyone does. And that's a part of it. Ignorance, definitely, and laziness, the lack of a desire to learn. But how do we get to the point that half of the country was willing to stay home on house arrest for a year? I think there's two things. It's fear and lies. People behave a certain way when they're gripped by fear, and we have cultivated a culture of fear in this country and abroad as well, as we heard Anthony talk about what's going on in Scotland. Everything from helicopter parents to hypervigilant food safety to terror alerts. It all conditions us to be afraid of the world that we live in, to beg for safety measures, to beg for a snug little cage and to snuff out our curiosity, our interest in life and our bravery. Fear it's the little death that brings total obliteration. And what benefit? Avoiding danger is really, when you obsess over it, it's no safer in the long run than just exposing yourself to something dangerous. It's going to happen eventually. We live in an inherently unsafe world. And fearful people are caught just as often as those of us who are bold. And we saw that with different states that had different strategies on lockdowns and with people who stayed at home and still ended up getting sick. Fear will infect you no matter where you sit, no matter where you sleep, if you let it. And it'll warp your judgment, and it'll overtake your best sensibilities. It makes you susceptible to the other thing that's wreaked so much havoc on us during the last year, and that's lies. We live now in a culture of lying. People are fearful, and they're lied to by by government propaganda, by the media, whatever you want to call it. It's everywhere. It's brazen and it's out in the open. Our government lied to us about the effectiveness of lockdowns. It lied to us about the efficacy of PCR testing. It lied to us about mask mandates, and it's lying to us about the safety and efficiency of COVID vaccines right now. It's all still continuing. And before that, it lied to us about the war on terror, the war on drugs, the war in Vietnam. It's what we've come to accept from government. And we also sort of romanticize lying and deception in entertainment too. I think this is a cultural problem, and we need to try to fix it. Truth is the antidote. Ron Paul said truth is treason in an empire of lies, and that's what we're living in now. So how do we make this journey out of exile? It's like we're so lost in this metaphorical desert, right? We're like blinded by lies and fear. What will a journey out of exile look like? Can we even conceptualize it? Consider this. It's more important for people who live in this country to escape the bondage of fear and lies than it is for them to regain their physical freedoms. No one who opposes lockdowns wants to hear it, but it's a hard truth. And the reality is, without truth and without bravery, we're just going to get locked down again and again and again. The precedent has been set. We cannot restore freedom in this country. We cannot restore freedom in this country until we open people's minds and chase the fear out of people's hearts. So now let's talk about waking people up. First rally cries for freedom, like protests, events like this, they're usually met by people like us with a good deal of acceptance. The prospect of a magical release from bondage without cost or difficulty is always met with approval, because why wouldn't it be? But the fight for freedom is never without cost and struggle. There's no moment in history when it ever has been. I can't think of a single revolution where everybody was able to keyboard their warrior into freedom. And it's in the context of this struggle that important foundational questions emerge too. What is freedom? What is in its power? What's in the power of freedom? Can people be trusted with their own freedom? Our government doesn't seem to think so. What's more valuable then, freedom or security? Now we're sort of honing in on the real problem, right? People are ignorant of the relationship between freedom and personal responsibility. And until they come to understand the relationship between the two, deliverance from oppressors will only lead to different oppressors. So this is something we got to wake people up to, because this ignorance was weaponized against us the last year when the societal mantra turned into collective responsibility. You have to wear a mask so that you don't get someone else sick. We're all in this together. Stay home, save lives. These slogans, maybe they're well-meaning, but they're off base because they don't take into account personal responsibility. So maybe let's drill down to this issue a little bit more. Can someone be totally free without assuming any personal responsibility? Maybe. It depends on what you're talking about when you talk about freedom, which is another thing we should probably figure out when we're talking about people who don't agree with us. I think a good example that everyone can understand is like a homeless drug addict on Skid Row. So I live in LA, and Skid Row is basically like an open-air mental institution full of homeless drug addicts, thousands of them. It's tragic and sad. People generally do what they want until the violence turns into something that's close to murder, and then the cops finally descend. You can get away with all kinds of things down there. But running free on the streets, like free of responsibility, those people, they're trapped in a prison of addiction, and it's like a cycle of pain and torment. And this is what I'm talking about when I say people can be trapped by their own ideological prisons. So what difference does it make if you have freedom from government, but you're enslaved by something else, like a bad ideology? We need to assume responsibility for ourselves. Assume responsibility for yourself, for your own actions, so that you can manage your freedom And then you can safeguard your liberties from thieves and abusers, because then you understand the balance between freedom and responsibility, and you're not trying to push that responsibility off to someone else. That's what we need to teach people so that we can basically reunite with our natural, God-given, whatever you want to call it, freedoms. And the people in power, they're brainwashed by fear and lies too, just in a different way. Also, fire Fauci. Fire him. So many people treat that man like a god, or like he's like the high priest of the Church of Science. And why shouldn't he act that way when everyone treats him like that? There's no incentive for him to obey the demands of the American people. Since he doesn't accept the reality of the damage his central planning and web of lies has done, and since he refuses to acknowledge our personal sovereignty and personal responsibility, he has to imagine some other reason for the public outcry that's happening right now. People must be stupid, undeserving of our freedoms. Maybe we're all evil. That's what we're up against. We're up against a frightened, hypnotized population led into the darkness by liars like Dr. Fauci, who don't believe that we should have the right to control our own lives. We've got to wake people up, and we've got to fight back. So, what does that look like? The beginning of, I guess, the journey out of exile. A real battle for liberty will make our immediate situation much more difficult, not easier. And this is something that, this is where people start to I start to lose people. They get a little bit uncomfortable and they kind of shift in their seat and they're like, well, I like going to protests and I like going to things, but it's going to have to be more than that. When you seriously begin to pursue freedom, you attract the attention and the wrath of the enemies of freedom. When you speak up, it's like you draw the eye of Sauron upon yourself. I know some of you in Delaware have already felt this way in your battles against this stuff, because I've talked with you about it. And it brings into sharp focus some important questions, right? Like, we see how this crisis, which exists as a result of government's recalcitrance and the dramatically worsened situation, thanks to that government, will provide a setting for the much-needed demonstration of character that needs to come out of the liberty movement. We need to build ourselves up and be fit emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically if we're going to actually take this battle on. Physical deliverance from lockdowns and vaccine passports cannot happen until we have a spiritual, psychological, emotional, whatever you want to call it, awakening. We need to embrace freedom in our hearts with all of its uncertainties and its perils, but also with its boundless opportunities. So how do we keep all of this mess from happening again, which is a big concern of mine, especially living in Los Angeles? How do we combat this? The first thing we got to do is we got to tell the truth. The truth is what's going to set you free before anything else. Truth will just burn off all of the lies and the fear. It strips you of the extraneous excuses you've made up that allow you to live a compartmentalized, inconsistent life. It's like a refiner's fire. And it can be painful to feel your old worldview burn off and watch kind of like the ashes blow away in the wind. And I'm sure we've all seen at least one friend go through that process the last year. Or maybe you went through it yourself. Almost everyone who identifies as a libertarian had that moment where their worldview kind of imploded, or was destroyed, and they saw things for how they really were. Have you ever seen the movie They Live? I rewatched it. Yeah, I rewatched it a couple nights ago. There's this epic fight in the movie, which you should all watch, where the main character is trying to make his friend put on a pair of special glasses so that he can see the deception that's actually taking place in the world around him in the movie. And the friend refuses, and he's obstinate. And he refuses because he's afraid to see the truth. He doesn't want to know. So they have this brutal fist fight in an alley until his friend is finally beaten down, physically and metaphorically, to the point that he has no choice but to put on the glasses and see the world for what it really is. What does it do to your soul when you sit on the truth? When you refuse to speak out of fear, cowardice, whatever's holding you back, like social pressure. When you refuse to share the truth with everyone around you, why would you refuse to share the truth when you know everyone is lying? It's like it kills a little part of your soul. You can feel your spirit wither, right? When you know the truth and you refuse to speak out on the truth, it's like you're living a lie. And that's not going to fly for us if we want to get out of this mess. We need boldness and we need bravery and we need the truth. And if you're going to speak the truth, you need courage to speak the truth so that we can end this miserable exile and separation from our freedoms. The song goes, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." Everyone's heard that song. Everyone's heard that song. It's about letting everyone know what you're about and sharing your truth. You pay a price for everything you do, and you pay a price for everything you don't do, and that includes silence. It's not all bad, though. The truth will also build you up, and it'll strengthen you, and it'll be your armor and your shield, and it'll help you become courageous. And that's what we need right now. We need everyone to be brave. Not everyone is brave. So how do you become brave? You generally need to confront three things. You need to confront yourself, your immediate surroundings. Some of you, that's the Delaware Libertarian Party, your county affiliate, your organization, your workplace. And then you can confront the world. Most people never get to the point of confronting themselves because it just seems too unbearable. And this is why they struggle to affect meaningful change in the world or to do it without wrecking the things around them. They stay lost in their own mental wilderness or their mental prison. The best way to confront yourself, in my advice, is to rip the Band-Aid off quickly. No one's perfect. There's no perfect libertarian. There's no perfect whatever. Just confront your fears and get it over with. You already know what's wrong with yourself internally, maybe. But you're too afraid to articulate it in your head or say it out loud. So just get it over with as quickly as possible. Maybe you're fearful. Maybe you're self-conscious because you feel like you're a coward. Or maybe you're in debt. Or maybe you're a slob and you're disorganized. It's totally okay. Because you've probably got plenty of marketable skills and admirable traits too. Maybe you're very well read on libertarian philosophy. Maybe you're a very generous person and you've got a lot of friends. So how do you take all that stuff, the good and the bad, your personal baggage, and become a brave person? You start by working on just one thing at a time. Maybe you have authoritarian family members who just sit at home and watch CNN and praise Fauci all day. And every time they text you, you just grind your teeth. But you never say anything because they're your family, and you never say anything, even though you're a very articulate messenger and you know exactly what you should say. Well, maybe you can just start your journey into bravery right there. Start by piping up respectfully, if it's your family, and put some of that articulate messaging out there. Well, actually, Mom and Dad, lockdowns have failed and PCR testing isn't being used properly. And here's the evidence, because I'm sure we've all got an army of links and articles and PubMed everything. I know you're a compassionate and intelligent person, Mom, so I think you should reconsider what you've heard in the media. Tackle these things just one thing at a time. It'll make you brave. Just do that and keep going. So back to the journey out of exile. Our foundation is truth and bravery, but there has to be a fight. And you have to ask yourself, in the fight, and in the moment when you're not fighting, when you're living in a semi-lockdown state, how much are you willing to give up? At what point does living slide into this meager existence or subsistence, day in, day out, masked, working from home, no entertainment? Do you ever want to go back to that? What act would it take by government to get you riled up enough to really put something on the line and to make a personal sacrifice? Lots of people who hate lockdowns were afraid to even have an uncomfortable 20-second interaction with a grocery store employee over masks. I know, people are going to scream about property rights. The grocery store has a right to make you wear a mask. I get it. People make all kinds of excuses to enable government policies, to ruin our lives and rob us of our joy, and to sneak away from any perceived discomfort. Cowardice is a real problem in this country. Most of us are very soft because we have not endured the miserable suffering that people in places like the Soviet Union have endured. We enjoy the comforts of extremely prosperous capitalist society that has given us a lot of comforts at wonderful discount prices. I'm extremely grateful for those things. I love IKEA furniture. I love Instacart. I love post-scarcity levels of entertainment, free YouTube, $8 Netflix, whatever. So many people are distracted, though, by maybe those things from our descent into totalitarianism. And libertarians, we have our bread in circuses too. We have infighting and drama, getting in someone else's business, insulating ourselves maybe a little bit too much, slipping into revolutionary daydreams while we do nothing effectively on the outside. That was kind of how I perceived QAnon to be, hoping for a dark, shadowy figure to rush in and save the day so that you can do nothing. Do you think we can keep everything that we have? Do you think we can keep it indefinitely? Keep a government shutdown from happening again when we're not brave? It's a republic if you can keep it. That's what Ben Franklin said. And I'm not confident that we can keep it, but I desperately want us to. If you want to keep the freedoms you have left, you've got to be willing to make some sacrifices. Rather than tell you to go storm the governor's house, which I know you will not, I want to propose a challenge that you can actually do. Push a little bit past your comfort zone. If you've got to go in a store where you got to wear a stupid mask because these people are still terrified by government propaganda, take it off. See what happens. If you get screamed at, fine. You can put it back on. Take it off. Go to the shooting range if you've never shot a gun. Buy a gun if you've been putting it off. Tell one friend in person to their face why you think lockdowns or vaccine passports are wrong. Fake a vaccine passport. Fake it. Whatever your comfort zone is, push past it just a little bit. It'll toughen you up. You need to get strong. Are you interested in medical freedom? Maybe dissolving the mirage of mainstream medical narratives all around you? Then change your diet, work out, and get in shape to escape the state. There's a lot more than just typing on the internet. Everything should start with you. We all want to see a change in this world, but you got to be that change if you want to see that change. And you need to do that to inspire the people around you. I think you've got gun grabber bills that are coming down the pipeline in Delaware too. I would recommend you do something about it so you don't turn into the People's Republic of California, like where I live. Be aware. Look into that. I don't like the thought of being disarmed while I'm locked down. That freaks me the hell out. All of this bad stuff is a product of people's apathy and fear. It's pushed by government propaganda, it's pushed by lies, so we need to fight back against it hard. And we need to fight back together. A lot of us are divided by superficial political labels. Democrats and progressives who oppose lockdowns are afraid to be seen at protests with Trump supporters. People are afraid to take off their masks because they think other people are going to assume they're a Republican. We just literally don't have time for that. We don't have to be afraid of someone raising their eyebrows at us, right? That's like bravery 101. Don't be afraid of someone's eyebrows that you don't know from across Walmart or whatever. We have to deal with government that robbed the entire nation of due process because of germs. That's where we're at. We have to deal with government that wants to disarm us. They want to rob us of joy. They want to separate us from our families during the holidays, to force our grandparents into nursing homes with sick people while they refuse to allow us, healthy people, to visit with them. That's what we're up against. So we can't be paranoid of what our neighbors might think of us. We have to stand against mass murderers and stand with each other. These are my last words about bravery. People get bullied because they won't fight back. How do societies lose their freedom? One little sin at a time, right? You go to work, someone's like lording their cubicle authority over you. Someone's tyrannical, you don't have the wherewithal to stand up. Maybe you see someone else being bullied or censored. You don't have the backbone to stand up to them. Government thugs rob you of your income, lock you in your home, and you just roll over to them because, it's like, okay, then you're a slave. If you do that, you're a slave. And if you continue to be a slave, you will continue to generate tyrants all around you. And the only thing that can stop you from behaving that way once you're locked into that pattern is the right kind of terror around you. So be careful what you give up. Be so careful during this next year because you don't know what kind of terror you could be unwittingly unleashing upon yourself and your surroundings and your loved ones and your family. The forces of tyranny will expand to occupy any space made available for its existence. People who refuse to defend themselves with their speech are just as vulnerable to exploitation as those who are genuinely unable to stand up for their own rights because of a disability or some other serious limitation on their physical or intellectual power. Being a coward makes you disabled, so that's why you must be brave. Slavery is miserable. Revolting is dangerous. But liberty is inherently dangerous. It's not safe, and that's okay. Think for a moment. Neither is subjecting yourself to the whim of a tyrant who doesn't care about you. Lockdowns aren't safe. We're not safe. It's okay. That is the human condition, and we should just embrace it. So let's end this exile. Let's begin a journey to reclaim our freedoms together. We are not intellectually crippled. We are the best and the very brightest. We have the best, most beautiful philosophy, and we have the best solutions. So let's be the bravest people we know, and let's work together to end this tyranny. Thank you guys so much for having me.